Thank you for stopping by. Before I get into some of the few factors that I think might have contributed to the coup that has just happened in Gabon, understanding the history, the country's leadership history, perhaps might help us put a few things into perspective. Gabon got its independence from France in 1960. It had its first black president by the name Léon Mbar in 1961. He became very authoritarian, and a few soldiers planned a coup d'etat in 1964. It was not very successful because France intervened at that time, and so he was reinstated. Shortly after, 3 years after that, he died, and then Omar Bongo became president, who led that country for 41 years up until his death in 2009. After his death in 2009, his son Ali Bongo became the president. But even prior to that, during his father's tenure, he served in different senior capacities in his father's administration as a minister, as other, in other positions as well that were quite significant during that time. There is a video that has now been circulating, that a recording of President Ali Bongo pleading with the world and his friends to make a lot of noise and help secure his release. And for many people have wondered, why is he using English, and yet Gabon is a francophone country? Well, Gabon joined Commonwealth in 2022, and so for him choosing to use language as a means of conveying this very important distress call, I think he could have been seen to be appealing to the Commonwealth, his association with Commonwealth, the leadership of Commonwealth, the leaders of Commonwealth, to try to intervene and maybe talk to the juntas and something like that, and help with securing his release. But that is just me thinking out loud, but that could be one of the reasons why. Otherwise, why did he choose to use English, and yet the country is a francophone? Okay, and Gabon has a population of over 2.4 million people. It's one of the smallest countries in the continent. It has a forest cover of over 85%. I think one of the reasons why this coup in Gabon was inevitable is one has to do with its natural resources. Gabon is well endowed with natural resources, including natural gas, crude oil. We do have timber, we do have manganese, and of course the forest that I've mentioned there is also a natural resource. Gabon accounts for nearly 25% of international trade in manganese. Oil makes up to over 50% of the country's revenue. And yet, with all this oil and with all these other natural resources, it still has over a third of its population languishing in poverty. So when people see that their country is wealthy, but majority of them don't get to benefit, what do you think will happen? These army officials, they are citizens of that country first, so they see what is happening. They see the mismanagement of the natural resources. They see how the president is colluding with other countries, as a gatekeeper to benefit them at the expense of the citizens in that country. So why would that make for a ripe or a fertile ground for a coup? So I think that has to do with that, because the natural resources are in plenty, and yet that has not been seen to translate into transforming the lives of the majority of the citizens. The other issue has to do with the just concluded elections, which the opposition has claimed are flawed. No election observers were allowed into this year's elections in Gabon to observe the elections, and no media from outside Gabon was allowed to cover the elections in Gabon. So if you remove these very important safeguards as far as a democratic process is concerned, and of course in such a country there's no active civil society, so you are left at the mercy of the leadership of that country. And as in previous general elections in Gabon, there were serious concerns about the process in the recent vote. Main opposition candidate Albert Ondo complained that many polling stations lacked ballot papers bearing his name, and even some of the candidates that had stepped down much earlier, before even the ballot papers were printed, the Electoral Commission in the country decided to put their names in the electoral paper, in the ballot, and yet remove the leading opposition candidate, name in certain areas. So those are just a few cases of perhaps what would have been considered election rigging of some sort, And then there are some key changes that were made in the ballot boxes just few weeks before the election that is contrary to the electoral laws in that country. And even when the military officers were giving the statement in the coup, they said they had suspended even the results of that election, meaning perhaps also they had doubts that President Ali Bongo won this outrightly. Okay, so they suspended the results, they suspended other institutions, and so the flawed elections really acted as a catalyst to this coup in Gabon, no doubt. The other issue that also created a very fertile ground for the removal of Ali Bongo is the Bongo's family political dominance in Gabon for, I think, 56 years. And Bongo came to power after his father died in 2009. I think I've mentioned that from the introduction. And before that, his father had been in power for 41 years. Mr. Bongo's overthrow would end his family's over 55 years hold on power in Gabon. There has been simmering resentment from the people over Bongo's family having ruled Gabon for that much long, and so the public had been expressing their discontent over broader issues, as far as the cost of living and things like that is concerned. But I mean, look at how they were dancing in the streets in Libreville. After that announcement was made, everybody was happy, from the young to the old. They were tired of his family. So this overstaying in power that we see in some of our countries here in Africa, I think it is a recipe for disaster. It is a recipe, and it creates another instability and insecurity in a country, because it gets to a point that people get tired. I mean, surely there has to be some other qualified people from Gabon who can lead that country outside of the Bongo family. So that also was a factor, I think. This is just my opinion. You can tell me what you think, and you can add on to some of the things that you think might have contributed to this. Another reason is the state-sanctioned corruption. As with many African countries that have been endowed with rich natural resources that never benefit the people, the reason why has always been corruption, and that was not an exception even in Gabon. 9 members of the Bongo family are under investigation as we speak in France, and some face preliminary charges of embezzlement, money laundering, and other forms of corruption, according to a French organization dedicated to accountability called SHEPA. And investigators have linked the country to more than $92 million in properties in France, including 2 villas in Nice and many other, corruption cases in the Bongo family, and also the members of close members of his government, and others, the top leadership in the country. So if people are not benefiting from what they're supposed to be benefiting with, because the leadership of the country has facilitated an avenue for corruption, where public mismanagement of public funds is the order of the day, people get tired. And so this state-sanctioned corruption also could be just one of the few reasons that perhaps made this coup possible. And my last point is France's weakening influence. At the beginning, I told you the first President Leon Bar, the coup d'etat that was staged in 1964 was not successful because France intervened. But in this case, I think the army might have felt empowered because France's influence in its former colonies is weakening, and so the chances of France intervening perhaps was never there. And as we have seen so far, France has not intervened, so that could have empowered them to carry out this coup, because they felt they would not meet so much resistance. I'll not get into the details of France's influence, and what has been happening in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in Guinea, and these other countries that are former colonies of France, and what has been happening there. Perhaps comparing what has been happening in Burkina Faso, in Mali, and recently in Niger, there is some element of external forces behind those coups. But when you look at Gabon, there's no clear evidence that there is an external force that is behind this coup. Maybe we will learn as the days goes by, but there really isn't much to write home about. In Niger, you've seen France is really having a hard time with the junta there. The French ambassador to Niger to leave, but France has said, no, you're not the right authority of that country, so you have no right to ask the ambassador to leave. According to the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, when a receiving state decides it does not want your ambassador in its country, you have no choice. It does not even have to give its reasons why. Your job is to take your ambassador and bring another one, okay? If the receiving country refuses, the job is to take your ambassador and then you send another one, okay? The sending state has to do that. But France is saying the junta does not have the authority to make such a decision. So there has been a stalemate, and now the junta announced that it has removed the diplomatic immunity against the ambassador, so most likely he'll be deported. I mean, it's getting messy. But the reason why France is holding on so much in these countries is because of it's benefiting so much. There's 14 former colonies of France in Africa are still paying the colonial tax to France, so it's going to lose so much outside of just allies, even in terms of its remittance, the resources it's been getting from Africa. It's going to be affected. So that's why you see France is really fighting hard, but also its influence over its former colonies, it has really weakened, so that really might have really inspired the coup leaders to lead this coup. So those are just some of the things that I think on top of my head could have contributed to this coup, but I'm sure there are others, and we shall continue learning about them as time goes. But if you think there's anything that I could fit in that, you're free to add there, and we can continue with this conversation. Thank you so much for your time.